As a child, Mary often tested her mother's patience with insistent requests for a sibling. "Daughter, we can't. I have to work, or how will we live?" her mother explained. "Mummy, you work and I'll take care of the little one. I'll feed, dress and walk them. I can do it all myself. Please." "Mary, you have to go to school, remember?" "I'll take my sister or brother with me. They'll sleep in the stroller during lessons," Mary fantasized. Mum only smiled tightly and changed the subject. Soon enough, Mary stopped begging for a baby. She quickly grew up and realized how much energy her mother spent ensuring they had everything they needed. They had always lived alone, without even a grandmother. Helen, Mary's mum, grew up in an orphanage. She worked as a procedural nurse, and Mary often visited her at work after school. She knew everyone there and felt at home. When adults asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, Mary answered without hesitation, "A doctor, of course." Helen's friends were a bit envious. "Your Mary is so serious. You don't have to monitor her studies at all. She's pretty with a lovely figure, yet all she thinks about is studying. She's so sensible. It's a miracle." "Mary knows there's no one to help her," Helen explained candidly. "She wants to go to medical school, which is very challenging to get a scholarship there." Later, when Mary did secure a scholarship and began studying there, the same friends of her mother wondered, why did Mary choose pediatrics? Children are fussy. Parents are always dissatisfied. It's stressful work. She should have gone into dentistry. It's a gold mine. She chose it herself. Helen shrugged. She loves children, so she went into pediatrics. "It'll be harder to earn good money with that speciality," the curious sympathized. "You should have at least advised her." Helen remained silent. Yes, they lived poorly, but she couldn't decide for her daughter. Helen's story was simple. Her beloved Boris turned out to be married with 2 sons. Upon learning this, young, naive Helen was so shocked that she couldn't accuse him or start sorting things out. She simply lied that she'd found someone else and they were breaking up. She thought this might hurt his ego a little and make it easier for her to survive the collapse of her hopes. Helen moved to a big city, quickly found a job, but soon learnt she was pregnant. It was too late for other options. The only choice was to give birth. Amanda, a friend from the orphanage, advised, "Don't worry, you can always give birth and leave the baby at the hospital. They'll understand. You're alone, low income from an orphanage. You just started working. You're not in a position to have children." "Amanda, are you crazy?" Helen asked sadly, without anger. "Leave a child to grow up in an orphanage? Like you and me?" "We were just unlucky. We were older when we lost our parents. There's a waiting list for healthy babies from healthy mothers. A wealthy couple will adopt your baby, and their life will be much better than with you." "That's debatable," Helen declared stubbornly. "Money matters, but it's not everything." She knew she could never abandon her child. She would raise them herself. A colleague at work supported her. "I was born after the war, and it's difficult to imagine how my mother and other women managed. But we all grew up. No one starved. Most of my childhood friends became good people. Some even became successful. Of course, times are different now and children's needs have changed, but the love between mother and child remains. Life can surprise you. You'll have a precious little person, and you'll find strength for everything." Helen was scared, feeling foolish and helpless, but she decided not to dwell on her fears. Her daughter was born, weighing only 3 kilograms, with huge blue eyes. Helen named her Mary, hoping a girl with such a beautiful name would have a beautiful destiny. And now Mary had grown up and become a medical student. In her 3rd year of studies, after passing the nursing exam, Mary received her certification to work as a nurse. She had been waiting for this opportunity since her 1st year, eager to support herself and gain valuable experience for her future career. Soon, Mary was hired at the hospital's paediatric department for the evening and night shift. Her mother worried that work might affect her studies, but was pleasantly surprised to see energetic Mary successfully juggling both. Mary herself wasn't surprised at how quickly she adapted to her first job. Perhaps it was the familiar atmosphere from her childhood visits, or maybe it was the interesting team in paediatrics. The nurses of various ages were all positive and sociable. The doctors were too. With Dr. Aaron Logan, who had graduated 5 years ago from the same paediatric faculty where Mary now studied, the relationship was almost friendly. Mary immediately liked his way of communicating with patients and colleagues. Not talkative, without arrogance or irritability, with a calm sense of humour. This doctor appealed to her. Mary was happy when their shifts coincided. She didn't know how, but she was certain he enjoyed these coincidences too. As the noisy children's ward quieted down for the night, Mary and Aaron often chatted softly at the nurses' station. They discussed faculty, teachers, exams, and various cases from practice that Aaron had accumulated over his years of work. Mary didn't need to check the schedule to know when Aaron was on duty with her. He'd always place a large candy bar on her desk when he arrived. "It's for business, to keep me from getting too sleepy on the night shift," he explained. "Thank you. Bitter, just the way I like it," Mary gratefully replied. "You mentioned once that you prefer bitter. I have a good memory. Can't help it." When alone, they spoke on a first-name basis. It had just happened naturally. In the presence of colleagues, young patients, and their parents, they used the formal way, of course. When telling her mum about work, Mary often mentioned Aaron. She didn't suspect anything unusual until her mum cautioned one night. "Be careful, Mary." "About what?" Mary asked, confused. "With that Aaron you like so much. You know how charming these seemingly perfect guys can be when they want something. He seems interested in you, but he's still sizing you up, figuring out how to approach you. Mum, you should write novels. What ulterior motive could Aaron have? We're just co-workers with a great working relationship and a bit of friendship. We've never even met outside work, and you're already seeing danger." All right. No need to get defensive." Mum smiled, trying to sound cheerful and calm. "Just don't get too carried away, that's all." After her mum's words, Mary reflected. Perhaps Aaron, as she was used to calling him, did occupy her thoughts too often. To be honest, he was in them almost constantly, and that was unnecessary. She might invent all sorts of fantasies, believe in them, and expect something extraordinary from Aaron, who was unaware of her thoughts and hadn't done anything special to inspire them. Her mum never spoke ill of men, unlike some of her friends' mothers. She didn't say much about Mary's father either, but there was no bitterness. It was all beautiful, vivid, nice to remember, except that he turned out to be married with children. When he made promises to me, he believed them himself. Thus Mary was accustomed to approaching men with caution. They might say one thing and think another, simply because that's how they are. One should always remember that and not take what they say too seriously. Really, she should ensure that her relationship with Aaron remained purely friendly. It would definitely be better for her that way. "Mary, how do you feel about travelling?" Aaron asked by way of greeting. Her night shift was about to begin. "I don't know. I haven't really travelled," Mary shrugged. "We usually just went out of town on my mum's vacation, or on some excursions, or to her friend's dasher, but of course I'd love to travel some day." "Would a business trip suffice for now? You're on vacation. You've finished your exams. You could use a change of scenery." "Who would send me on a business trip?" Mary laughed softly. An indispensable nurse, sharing her vast experience. That's fantastic. Not at all fantastic. I'm being sent, aren't I? Aaron said with a smile. I'm going to the neighbouring region to consult at a small regional hospital's children department. There's an inexperienced paediatrician there, barely 6 months on the job, who's having trouble with a diagnosis. It's about an 8-year-old girl with a respiratory illness that looks like bronchial asthma, but we need to be sure. So, will you come along for company? Mary was slightly confused, unsure if Aaron was joking or serious. You need a support group for your first business trip? She asked. Well, then I'll go. Co-workers should support each other. Mary, I'm serious. I can really arrange for you to come on this business trip with me. It's valuable experience for a future doctor. This regional hospital doesn't have many technical capabilities, so it all depends on people. It's up to us to do a good job. Aaron, if I can really go too, I agree, Mary replied, trying hard not to betray her joy. Of course, she heeded her mum's advice. They had a trusting relationship. She feared her fondness for Aaron might get out of hand and lead to regrettable consequences. After all, she had heard stories of women quitting good jobs because of office romances. Mary didn't want to repeat such a scenario, but her desire to know Aaron better and interact with him outside work was stronger. Perhaps she was being too cautious, even cowardly. Aaron was a grown man, and if she didn't provoke him, nothing untoward would happen. The next morning, before Mary could hand over her shift, Aaron informed her that their bosses had approved their business trip. She could prepare the documents and get ready. The train would leave the day after tomorrow morning. Mary worried about her mother's reaction and even walked home to gather her thoughts. The weather was warm, and it was easier to think while walking. She needed to find the right words to reassure her mum. To Mary's surprise, her mother took the news calmly, or at least decided not to show her anxiety. Well, you are right to agree. Go. It'll be interesting and good experience. You're always at home when you're not studying or working. At least you'll get to see some new scenery from the train window. Meet new people. Oh, Mary, I wish I could just break away and go somewhere too. Mum, I'm working now. This is just the beginning. I'll make more money, and our budget will grow. Save up and finally go on a vacation. Yes, I will, now that I'm a proud mother of a grown daughter, Helen confirmed. It had been raining during the night and early morning, just before the train left. Rain before a journey is a good omen, Mary said, adjusting her small backpack and taking Aaron's outstretched hand to help her onto the carriage. You're superstitious, Mary, he smiled. Yep, Mary replied without embarrassment. When the omens are good, I believe in them wholeheartedly. I try not to notice the bad ones, hoping the trouble will take offence and go away. Quite a life philosophy, Aaron remarked. Why is your backpack so thin? Have you packed everything you need? It's 5 days, a whole working week. What an expedition chief I have, Mary laughed. Are you going to control every little thing? I assure you, I've thought of everything I need. Aaron was engaging on the journey. Unlike many of Mary's talkative classmates, he spoke eloquently about the simplest things. He even managed to win over their compartment mate, 5-year-old Owen, who was travelling with his mother. According to Owen's mum, it was a feat worthy of the most powerful magician. Mary had noticed this about Aaron from her first day on the job. He knew how to connect with children, understood them, and spoke to them as adults, but in words they could grasp. Mary would never ask Aaron directly, but she often wondered about his personal life. At almost 30, with his personality and love for children, it seemed surprising that he still lived alone. Aaron was from a small regional town, like the one they were visiting on this business trip. Now, in their city, he was paying off the mortgage on a nice spacious apartment. Maybe that's why he wasn't rushing into starting a family just yet. Mary, this is none of your business, she chided herself silently, grateful when Owen distracted her by asking her to teach him how to draw a cat. "Let's draw 100 cats of different colours. A whole cat city," she promised enthusiastically, despite her lack of artistic skill. At the hospital where the young specialists arrived for their business trip, Mary's first mishap was mixing up the wards. At the most inopportune moment, the barrette holding her heavy, long dark hair snapped, the very moment the local doctor had just invited Aaron into a young patient's room. Mary frantically searched her backpack for a spare hairpin. Aaron noticed and reassured her. "Don't fuss, it's not urgent. I'll be in the 2nd ward. Meet me there." Instead of the 2nd ward, Mary was directed to the 12th. She failed to notice the worn 1 on the door, focusing only on the bright 2. Undeterred by the silence from within, she opened the door and entered. The room housed 4 beds, but only 2 small patients were present. Neither Aaron nor his local colleague, Dr. Russum, was there. One older boy sat idly in bed, engrossed in his cell phone, and merely muttered a quiet hello. The other, a small boy of about 6, immediately ran up to Mary, took her hand and said, "Hello, do you want to see how I drew Edward?" "Sure, show me," Mary agreed, intrigued, "if Edward doesn't mind." Mary observed the little boy's activity. When she entered, he had been drawing with pencils in a regular school notebook on the long, unpainted windowsill. She initially assumed Edward was the artist's only ward mate. But the older boy, about 11 years old, explained in a world-weary sigh, "I'm Matthew. Edward is a fish in the aquarium in the lounge area. A goldfish. Tommy named him." "Here's Edward," the brown-eyed boy handed Mary his drawing. It depicted, with surprising neatness and accuracy, an aquarium goldfish swimming in the sea. Above it shone the sun, and a pair of seagulls, resembling black check marks, flew overhead. "Wow, I couldn't do that," Mary, who couldn't draw, admitted honestly. "What's your name?" Tommy inquired of the woman in the white coat. "Mary," she introduced herself. "Then I'm Tommy," he said seriously. "Does Edward look like the real one? Does he?" "I haven't seen it yet, Tommy," Mary admitted. "When I do, I'll let you know." "And don't feed him," the boy cautioned. "You don't know what it can eat. It might get poisoned, like me. And there are no hospitals for goldfish." "So, you're here because of poisoning? But you seem almost fully recovered now." "Yeah, it's not worth talking about." Tommy waved his hand dismissively, clearly mimicking an adult's gesture. "Oh, all right. By the way, I came here mistakenly," Mary remembered, feeling her cheeks and ears flush. "The doctors are waiting for her, perhaps even looking for her, and here she was, not only lost but in no hurry to leave. I need to go, they're waiting for me in Ward 2. "Do you have children there?" Tommy asked immediately. "No, I'm a nurse with a doctor. We're here on a business trip." "That's good," Tommy decided aloud. "Please come again." "I will," Mary promised. "And soon, probably, your mum will come to visit you. You'll give her Edward's portrait." "No one will come to me," Tommy replied matter-of-factly. "Only Matthew's mother and father sometimes come." "Yeah, he's from the orphanage," Matthew explained calmly. 5 minutes later, Mary was in the right ward. But even if she were reproached for taking so long to find the right ward, she would hardly take it to heart. Her encounter with Tommy lingered in her thoughts. The girl, Holly, as Aaron suspected, likely didn't have bronchial asthma, as initially assumed, but they needed to wait for the laboratory test results. The lingering illness had made Holly sad, and Mary barely managed to get her to talk. "Have you seen the goldfish here? The one named Edward?" "Fish aren't called that," objected a surprised Holly. "It's a boy's name." "Some fish have names and grant wishes," Mary explained confidently. "You can make a wish." Dr. Russum the local paediatrician, chuckled slightly as he listened to Mary talk to the children. Later that day, it became clear that Mary's visit was not only useful but necessary. One of the nurses in the children's department had caught a bad cold and come down with a fever. Another was on vacation out of town, and Mary was asked to take the full day shift, and she gladly agreed. In the evening, on the way to the hotel, Aaron suddenly suggested, "What's there to do in a hotel? Let's see the city in the evening, walk along the waterfront, sit in a cafe. I'll treat you." "Yeah, let's. Thanks," Mary replied. "You're unusually pensive today. Are you tired? Do you regret coming?" "No, not at all," Mary said, trying to sound cheerful. It was true that she was distracted. Aaron was doing his best to entertain her, but she remained lost in thought. "Aaron, I'm sorry. I've been curious about everything since we got on the train," Mary decided to share. "It's just that I can't get Tommy out of my mind, the boy I met when I mixed up the wards. Dr. Russum said Tommy will be discharged in a couple of days. Everything went well. He was brought in on time. Most likely he ingested something during a walk in the forest, like a poisonous ornamental berry. Did the child complain about anything? What are you worried about?" "I just found out he's from an orphanage, and I'm sure no one will come for him. My mum grew up in an orphanage and told me about it occasionally. It's hard for kids like Tommy there. He's open to people, and people can be very different. And you should see how he draws. It's not just scribbles. It's like a real illustration from a children's book or a cartoon." Mary suddenly became embarrassed and stopped talking, catching Aaron's attentive gaze as he listened silently. "You probably think I'm a naive student who's encountering an orphaned child in the hospital for the first time and falling apart out of inexperience. My mum warned me that I'd see many unpleasant things, and that this is life. I got to ignore it and just do my job well." "You can't read minds," Aaron said with a soft, friendly grin, spreading his hands. "I just think you're a person who can empathise. And I don't think about naive college girls at all." Mary couldn't help but snort with laughter. Aaron had a way of cheering her up without saying or doing anything special. They had dinner in a small coastal cafe, discussed everything that came to mind, watched fishing boats and vessels with lanterns that looked like fireflies over the dark water, and walked along the embankment until late in the evening. Mary tried not to dwell on the fact that she had never experienced such an evening before, remembering her mother's words. "Never create unnecessary expectations for yourself." But little Tommy from the 12th ward still came to mind every now and then, especially when she noticed boys his age walking with their parents or grandmothers. Those children knew for certain that someone loving would always be there for them in times of pain or fear. "No one will come for me," Tommy had said. It shouldn't be like that, Mary thought. He's so young, and already realizes that no one in the whole world cares about him. The shift began at 8 a.m, and Aaron quietly knocked on the door of the room at 7:30, even though he could have come to the hospital later. In small towns, it takes only about 15 minutes to get to work. The stores along the way were still closed, but Mary spotted a working kiosk near the bus stop. She picked out the largest and most colourful cartoon colouring book and 2 sets of large jigsaw puzzles. To her delight, a puzzle with funny, brightly coloured fish like Edward was on sale. Aaron was patiently waiting while she selected her gifts. They weren't late, after all. Mary hadn't noticed how quickly 2 day shifts passed in an unfamiliar hospital. The next morning, Tommy was to be discharged. He had managed to complete a puzzle with fish and wanted to give it to Mary as a souvenir, though he liked the picture very much himself. "The sea turned out beautifully. While I'm here, let it stay with me, and then you can keep it," Tommy said, and it was useless to argue with him. You'll take it home as a souvenir. He already knew that Mary and the new doctor came from another city and would soon return home. Mary's last shift was a whirlwind. There were numerous procedures, paperwork, and visits from parents, at appointments, asking questions and seeking help to catch the attending doctor. It was a bit unusual for a novice nurse, as she hadn't yet worked day shifts at her own hospital. She tried to keep up with everything and was so focused on her work that she flinched when a familiar child's voice called out, "Mary, look! I have visitors!" She turned around and saw Tommy, who was being held by the hand of a shy elderly woman in a light sundress. "Hello," Mary said as warmly as possible. "Well, Tommy, and you were afraid that no one would come to see you." "This is Mrs. Macpherson," the boy introduced his companion gravely. "Hello, Mary. Nice to meet you. I worked as a nanny, but quit 6 months ago to take care of my elderly father. I moved him out of the village. Yesterday, I met my ex-colleague Carol, who used to work with me at the orphanage. She still works as an assistant cook in the kitchen. We got to talking and she told me Tommy was hospitalized, so I rushed to the emergency room right away." "Oh, there's Holly!" Tommy quietly tugged on Mrs. Macpherson's hand, noticing a girl at the end of the corridor. "Can I go say hello?" He looked at both the women in turn. "Go ahead," Mary approved. With a genuine smile, slightly tired but satisfied, Mrs. Macpherson watched Tommy attentively as he left, then turned back to Mary. "You should hear how Tommy talks about you. I imagined you just like this. He describes people very accurately. I was surprised at first, but then I got used to it. He draws like an adult, learned to read quickly, and writes well. He's truly a golden boy. Any parents would be happy to have such a son. He's very good-natured and open to people. It would be hard for him in an orphanage. It's better to be tough there, or you'll experience human cruelty from childhood. His mother was a lonely woman. She gave birth when she was already in her 40s, at her own risk. Her heart was weak. She must have known that, but she decided to do it anyway. Maybe it was serious love, or maybe she actually wanted a child, who knows now. Tommy was 3 years old when she died. She worked at home sewing, knitting toys, making portraits to order, drawing. Her work was even displayed at exhibitions. Neighbours said she made wonderful things with her hands, and she wasn't quite an ordinary woman, as if not from our world. That's why Tommy is so talented. Do you have children of your own? No, I'm only 20 years old. I just finished my 3rd year of medical school and live with my mother, Mary replied. Well, you'll have time for that later, Mrs. Macpherson said reassuringly. I can see that you love children, and they love you. Before discharging, Mary persuaded Tommy to keep the fish puzzle. It's my gift to you, and gifts shouldn't be given back. Then I'll give you a portrait of Edward, Tommy immediately responded. I was going to give it to you anyway. It was true, as now at the bottom of the drawing there was an inscription in bright red pencil. Tommy, for Mary. Now, riding the train, Aaron heard a strange sound like sobbing. Looking closely at Mary, he noticed she was furtively wiping away tears hidden beneath her glasses. When he had invited her on this business trip, he had worried she might be different from how he had imagined. Aaron hadn't had much luck with girls. In high school, he had a crush on a bright, beautiful classmate, Laurie. It even seemed she had a thing for him too. She was open to dating, going to movies, cafes and discos, the only entertainment options in their small town. But at graduation, when he seriously discussed his plans about studying in the same city, sticking together, and supporting each other, Laurie replied, I didn't want to say anything before, but now it's time. I'm going to the capital. My aunt promised to get me a job at her company. I've got to get on with my life. I don't want to spend it counting pennies like my mum. Yeah, I like you a lot. You're tall, handsome, you work out, you don't drink, you're not rude. I'm sorry, but I didn't love you, and I hope to find a guy in the capital who will help me solve my financial problems." Since then, Aaron didn't like to remember his graduation, but now he recalled it calmly and even with gratitude. Laurie at least had been honest about her plans and hadn't tormented him. At the medical school, Aaron met a classmate named Megan. She didn't have Laurie's striking beauty, but she had charm, a sense of humour, and shared Aaron's interests. He was sure that he and Megan were serious. He made plans and he was going to invite her to visit his parents on vacation. Megan beat him to it and invited him to her summer house. Aaron wasn't prepared for what he discovered. Megan's parents were wealthy. She had always been so down-to-earth, dressed in ordinary cheerful t-shirts and jeans. No interest in entertainment or glamour. He would never have guessed that her parents' summer house was such a mansion. As it turned out, Megan's father owned a company trading in medical equipment. Megan's parents met Aaron with impeccable politeness, but rather coolly. He realized undoubtedly, to them, he was a simple, poor provincial guy who could only be their daughter's friend. He also understood that Megan loved her father very much and listened to him. After that, they began to distance themselves from each other. They skirted around what was happening in silence, didn't quarrel, and just one day became ordinary classmates with a friendly relationship, seeing each other occasionally in common company. Of course it was painful, but there was no point in humiliating himself by discussing the relationship when it was already clear. Megan, herself, agreed with her father that she and Aaron were from different worlds, which were better to cross only tangentially, not to mix seriously. It was fortunate that a diploma and residency loomed on the horizon, taking first place in his life for a while. He studied and worked and studied. Before Aaron knew it, his official studies were over, but he was sure that a decent, self-respecting specialist never stops learning, primarily to avoid unacceptable mistakes in such work. Somehow, quickly, his life became that of a serious adult. Aaron had 2 or 3 more short, easy and pleasant romances, but they didn't change his lifestyle at all, and it wasn't a habit to have them. On the contrary, he didn't want to waste any more time on it. His parents even seriously worried that their son would turn into a convinced loner in 10 years, busy only with work. Aaron was beginning to think so himself, even internally agreeing with this thought. But then Mary got a job with them, and he realized with a boyish joy that he was wrong. For months he had clearly understood that this was a girl dear to him, with whom everything could be different. But now, on the train ride home from a business trip, Aaron didn't know what to do. He was sure that Mary was crying, but so quietly and secretly that he couldn't dare to call out to her and try to comfort her. Finally the man quietly said, "Mary, are you all right? Please don't stay silent if something's wrong. Why don't we have some tea? We've got 2 hours until we're home. I'll go get some hot water." "Yeah," Mary agreed, trying to smile. When Aaron returned with 2 glasses of hot water, she had already pulled out dry cookies and fragrant, obviously homemade apples from her backpack. "Here, let's snack on these. Holly's grandmother brought us a whole basket of them." Overjoyed that Holly doesn't have terrible bronchial asthma, I left most for the children of the ward and took 2 apples for you and me. "Were you crying just now?" Aaron asked. "I can't stop thinking about Tommy," Mary admitted after a brief silence. Even the former nanny, Mrs. McPherson, said it would be hard for him to grow up in an orphanage. He needs a family. "I remember. You told me about his mum. Mary, a kid like that is bound to be adopted by a good family. If it hasn't happened so far, it's by pure chance because the orphanage is in such a remote area, and someone lazy is responsible for the information. We can help put up information about him ourselves. I know where and how to do it." Aaron paused briefly to sip his tea, and Mary immediately spoke up. "You know, don't laugh at me, but I'd take Tommy myself. I know it's stupid. No one will let me adopt a child. I'm a student living with a mum. I can't provide for a child. I can't even provide for myself yet. I just started working part-time. But I'll still visit him. I promised him, or rather, I couldn't promise because Tommy himself asked me, 'You will still come to visit me, won't you?' And I really can visit him. The trip is without transfers and not so long." Mary felt a little uncomfortable being so frank. Not only had she woken Aaron with her whimpering, but she decided to share her worries. "You'll probably remember this business trip for a long time," she tried to laugh. "You took an impressionable student with you, and she made such a melodrama." "Absolutely. I'll remember it for sure," Aaron promised with a disarming smile. "And I'm ready to go with you to visit Tommy, if you don't mind, of course. We can take my car and travel faster and more comfortably. What do you think?" Mary remained silent, afraid to say the wrong thing, to abandon her usual caution. She realized something was happening between them right now, and to be honest, it was happening all the evenings, when she and Aaron were walking around town after work, along the waterfront, eating ice cream and just talking. She reassured herself that it was just normal, friendly walks, knowing full well that she was lying to herself. Suddenly, Aaron asked, "Mary, will you and I spend evenings together at home? I would like that very much. I'd even say more than anything else in the world. You're the most wonderful girl I've ever met. It's serious and it's going to last. You can be sure of that. So I promise not to rush things. Do you agree?" Aaron reached across the table to her, and Mary simply put her hand into his palm in agreement. Tony hadn't thought he would come to this backwater town for a second time. Usually business trips to such places were one-offs, but when he was offered to manage the opening of the second service centre of the company, he agreed without hesitation. It was interesting to look at a familiar address, which he still remembered well after several years. And in general, he needed to unwind, because even on vacation, he had to go only with his wife and wherever she wanted. And here were 2 weeks of legitimate business trip freedom. On the first evening, stepping out of the new renovation-scented office of his company, Tony went to visit a woman from his past. He took a bottle of champagne, Grace's favourite cake, and an unusual potted flower. She hated cut flowers in bouquets. He was sure that after 7 years, Grace was still living there. And where should she go from here, if she hadn't left even in her youth? When he met her, he thought she was much younger, so thin in a crimson mini-dress. He thought she'd be in her 30s, but she turned out to be 42. Grace had never married, living first with her mother and then alone after her mother's death. When he asked her why this happened, she just shrugged her shoulders. "It didn't work out. Didn't find the right man. And I never wanted to get married just for the sake of it. That's so medieval." Tony could see that she wasn't lying. She was, however, single, but not alone with her pictures, drawings and needlework. At the same time, communicating with her was easy and pleasant, especially because Grace didn't demand anything from their relationship. Tony was used to women always needing something, so he considered his arrangement with Grace the most pleasant of all. So what? Everyone likes it when life turns out conveniently. Even now, he had no doubt that Grace would be pleased to see him. True, her phone number was disconnected, but in 7 years she could have changed it several times. And the lights weren't on in the windows, but she could also be at the store or at a customer's for a fitting. Tony sat down on a bench at the entrance and waited. He noticed the curtain in the nearest first-floor window twitching occasionally, but didn't connect it with interest in himself until the window sash opened and a woman poked her head out. "Who are you waiting here?" the elderly madam asked sternly, casting an appraising glance over Tony and his bag of gentleman's kit. "Am I disturbing you in any way?" Tony inquired peacefully and politely. "Not really," the elderly lady hummed. "We have 3 floors to 3 entrances here. I can say with certainty that no one in our entryway is expecting guests. I don't know. Though I do remember your face from somewhere." "I'm an acquaintance of Grace Lewis from the 2nd floor," Tony admitted. He knew no one in this city, and his wife Hilary certainly had no acquaintances here. The curious woman's face immediately changed, as if his words were difficult to hear. She coughed, twitched the curtain as if it bothered her, and finally said sternly, "Grace Lewis is gone." "Moved away?" Tony asked, confused. "Died 3 years ago. She had a heart defect. Nobody knew. The child was left alone. No relatives. They took him to an orphanage." "A child?" Tony asked, disbelieving his ears. "Grace had no children. She wasn't planning to have any." Wasn't planning, but one day she did. That's her business," said the neighbour. "He was 3 years old then, so now he's 6. Tommy was born in March. Yes, he turned 6 this spring. Tommy Lewis, if you want to visit him at the orphanage." "I see," Tony said stupidly. "Take this, please. I have no one else to visit here." He held out his package to the window, and the woman silently took it, apparently also a bit confused. Tony made 3 laps of the embankment. Even the dog walkers and their dogs looked at him suspiciously, a lonely, suspicious type hanging around. This year, the time of birth. Everything fits. Tony and his wife Hilary had no children. She couldn't bear a child, and after several unsuccessful attempts, they stopped hoping. They were at an age when some people have grandchildren. Hilary tentatively suggested adopting, but Tony immediately rejected this option. He didn't want someone else's child with unclear heredity. The real parents might be such that you'd be scared to death afterward. Still, their own family's shortcomings were clearer and more familiar. At least there was someone to blame, and they didn't have any bad personalities in their family. Now it turned out that most likely Tony had his own son. Of course, it wasn't certain. He needed to check, but even to check required making up his mind. On the way back from the business trip, Tony, contrary to a long-standing habit, didn't even talk to the cute neighbours in the compartment. He ducked into his laptop, pretending to work, and thought. Knowing you have a child growing up in an orphanage is not the most pleasant feeling. Of course, I need to do a paternity test first. But Grace wasn't at all like a woman who changed men like gloves. On the contrary, I am sure she hadn't been with anyone for a few years, as she once admitted herself. Of course, she was such an original, all into creativity. Even her home interior was like a sorceress's. Different screens, lace curtains, paintings, and all by Grace's own hands. She wasn't a special beauty. I'd seen prettier, but she had a special charm. Yes, Tony didn't remember most of his business trips after so many years, but this one, thanks to Grace, he remembered with pleasure. Even now, on the way home, he was under the impression of the nasty, heavy news of her death, and then about the boy. It's true what they say. You don't go back to a place that was good for you. Nothing good ever comes of it. Now he'd seen it for himself. Something has to be done. Forget about a possible son until the paternity test is done. Or talk to Hilary. Most importantly, how to present it to Hilary. She's been nervous lately, irritated by the smallest things. He can't do without a thoughtful approach. And what to say? The truth? That's the only option left. Otherwise, how can he explain wanting to take this boy into the family and not another child? He doesn't even know how healthy and developed the kid is. Yeah, it's something to think about. It's better not to rush, to weigh the pros and cons. By the time it was time to go down to the station platform of his hometown, Tony decided that first he would contact the orphanage administration by email, then he would do a paternity test, and only then would he think about the conversation with Hilary, if it turned out that the child was his after all. Hilary, the head accountant of a stable company for many years, was considered a practical and sober-minded woman. Lately, however, she had been having more and more doubts. She constantly felt an inexplicable anxiety, and some premonitions wouldn't give her rest. What alarmed her wasn't the decline in strength, weight or wrinkles, but the strange behaviour of her husband Tony. His gaze seemed constantly absent, usually such a chatterbox, annoying her with unnecessary detailed stories about his boring work and colleagues. He now spoke only about business. Hilary finally realised what the expression "gone into himself" meant. She didn't want to ask. She had never had to before. She told her friend Amanda, who immediately assumed the most common explanation. "He's seeing someone, Hilary. I don't want to upset you, but that's how it usually manifests at first. If there's no evidence, it's useless to pursue the truth. He'll stubbornly deny everything, only to make you look like a jealous fool. Trust my bitter experience." Amanda did have experience. Her husband Leon had twice wanted to leave the family, but for some reason never did. The reason was unclear, but Amanda attributed this to her own merits. "When Leon first mocked me for suspicion, I decided, screw it, I'll maintain imperturbable calm. I said to myself, no hysterics, Amanda, no looking for a mistress or causing scandals. That would just show I'm a scandalous witch, and he should run away to that sweet, affectionate kitten. No way. I'm smart and calm, and I'm his rock. So, what happened? Leon ran away for a while and then calmed down. Now he's only thinking about building a summer house. In general, it's the victory of reason." Hilary nodded. It made sense. Amanda was right. Maybe it wasn't her worldly wisdom that kept Leon, but their jointly acquired property, which would have to be divided if they split up. Leon was too calculating and lazy for that. Still, Amanda had a point. If a couple continued to live together, it was better to do so without quarrelling than to accumulate resentments. She decided to keep quiet and watch. No, it didn't look like another woman was involved. Tony came home at the same time as usual, staying out late with friends a couple of times a week, as he had for years. Except for that absent look in his eyes, which was becoming more and more annoying. Nothing had changed. When Tony suddenly reminded Hilary of her long-standing desire to adopt a child, she tensed. Her husband was clearly starting from afar. He couldn't have just changed his mind. It wasn't in his character to pity orphans. She had worried for many years about not being able to become a mother, and was even ready to take such a measure. But Tony had always rejected the option of adopting someone else's child so categorically that now she was surprised. "I haven't offered it in years," she reminded him gently. "You're a smart woman, I know," Tony began, and his wife became even more wary. "Yes, I'm not stupid. I realise your flattery isn't for nothing. Tony, tell me straight. What's the matter?" "Hilary, I have a child. He's 7 years old. He lives in an orphanage in the town where I opened a new service 7 years ago. His mother died. Her heart was weak. He has no relatives." Touching. And 7 years later, I find out that my husband cheated on me with a sick woman on a business trip and left her a baby as a souvenir. That's a wonderful story. Is that who you're offering me as a son? Don't you think it would have been better if I didn't know he was yours? Would a complete strange child seem better to you than my son? Tony wondered sadly. Do you think I'm a saint? Isn't it hurtful to look upon this child as a lifelong reminder of your adultery? Hilary, I understand your feelings, but he actually looks like me. I've got a picture of him. I'll find it on my phone right now. He's a healthy boy, and the tutors say he's smart and capable. Are you sure he's yours? Hilary squinted at him. You're not particularly smart and... Don't be childish, Hilary. We're adults. Why do you have to insult me? You used to be happy with my intelligence level. Let's make me guilty now. Am I the one who went on business trips and had relationships with random acquaintances? Hilary, I'm sorry, but trust me, nothing like this has happened since. Let's put emotions aside and think straight. Here's a picture I found. Hilary reluctantly looked at the phone. Yeah, he's cute. His eyes are smart, she said idly. She stepped back and began silently putting the dishes in the dishwasher. She didn't want to throw a tantrum. It was quiet. She'll think about it, thought Tony, and he wasn't mistaken. A month later they went to meet Tommy Lewis. Tony rather liked the boy. Not a sportsman, not a leader, not too perky, much like himself. But calm. There would be fewer problems. And smart, likely to be one of those who earns with his head. Perhaps he'll become a restorer, also a lucrative profession. He clearly had Grace's talent, handsome as well and easy to approach. Pay attention to him and he'll love you. Tony wanted someone to love him. They could go fishing together, go to the countryside with a tent, in the company of men, all with their sons. Now he would also be with his. Hilary was silent for a long time after the meeting at the orphanage. In the evening at the cafe, while slowly stirring a scoop of ice cream into her coffee, she said, No, Tony, I won't love him. I keep trying to imagine his mother and immediately feel dislike. I begin to wonder what she could be like. What kind of women do you really like? No, I'm sorry, don't ask for the impossible. It'll be worse for the child that way. Tony realised that convincing Hilary was useless. He could only hope for a while that she might change her mind. Should I talk to her friend to persuade her? He wondered. Meanwhile, Carol, the assistant cook at the orphanage, was already sharing the news with her former co-worker. Mrs. Macpherson, you're about to fall over. A couple showed up today, interested in your favourite, Tommy. They sat in the principal's office for a long time and then talked to him outside. I was on my lunch break, feeding cats, and I watched them. I can't say they're young, both under 50, and it's obvious that they don't have children of their own. They're so stiff, they don't know how to communicate with a child. It seems they had long hoped to have their own children, but failed, so they decided to adopt. So, what kind of people are they, Carol? Don't beat around the bush. Mrs. Macpherson began to worry. I didn't like them very much, Carol sighed honestly. I can't say anything special about him, but he's rather prominent and knows it. And the wife seemed to be in her own world. The husband brought Tommy a soccer ball, tried to play, said something. Tommy seemed interested. And the wife, well, she smiles at the child, but somehow with strain. She looks at him so carefully, with such scrutiny, like he's a commodity in the market. Although it's immediately obvious that Tommy is smart and well developed. She was somehow cool to him from the start. Even I could see it, though I wasn't standing close enough to look directly into her eyes. I don't know, Mrs. Macpherson. I don't know. It seems to me, if a woman loves children, she approaches them differently and speaks differently. And Tommy, with this couple, was somehow wary too. He didn't seem to like them much. In general, I don't know what will come out of this story. We should call Mary, Mrs. Macpherson immediately concluded. Who? Carol didn't catch on. Well, who among us is a pensioner with sclerosis? Exclaimed her friend. That nurse Tommy met in the hospital, who now visits him with her boyfriend. That doctor, with whom she first came here. Didn't you see them yourself when you were feeding your cats? I don't only feed cats at work, Carol snorted. I have a lot of work to do in the kitchen, as you well know. I haven't seen your favourite couple, but I remember what you told me. Yes, really, call that girl, since Tommy loves her so much. Let them decide something. The child is not a toy. He has his own feelings. It took 6 months to convince her. Hilary agreed to try again, hoping the emotions had settled. Tommy was about to have a birthday. They bought a gift and went. The orphanage headmistress met them with a polite but official smile. Tommy no longer lives with us, and his last name is not Lewis. Why? Where is he? Asked Tony, realizing he was asking a foolish question. We have no right to divulge that information. He's been adopted. How? But I'm his father. There's a test result. Tony began, but the orphanage headmistress interrupted him adamantly, though just as politely. To my regret, we have many children in orphanages with living biological fathers. You haven't contacted me or the child for more than half a year. You haven't tried to reach out or make any inquiries about him. This doesn't bode well for serious consideration of you and your wife as parents. I may not be entitled to my opinion, but I'm sure the people who adopted Tommy have already become his real parents. Mary looked at her sleeping son in the bed. She had been so afraid that she and Aaron wouldn't be given custody. A young, newly established family, and she was student and only 14 years older than the child. But Aaron had been sure in a positive result from the very beginning and stubbornly believed that everything would work out. Mary often remembered the last 6 months with a happy smile. Life had suddenly become incredibly fast-paced. She and Aaron firmly decided to get married after just 2 months of dating. They simply couldn't imagine living apart. Helen's mother was shocked by such haste. It seems that Aaron is really reliable and decent, she cautiously admitted. But everything is happening so fast. But all right, I suppose it really does happen that way sometimes. But fate continued to surprise Mary's mum further. When she learned of their plans to adopt Tommy, she was silent for half a day. In the evening she called and said, I also want to meet my future grandson. Tommy irrevocably became her love from the first day, perhaps because he simply called her Helen and constantly drew her portraits. You're beautiful. No one else has such a grandmother, only me. What's most pleasant is that Tommy says these things just because he means them, not to ask for something, Helen said to her daughter with a smile. As if sensing Mary's gaze, Tommy opened his eyes and reported, I was running after some curly dog in a dream and fell into a hole, but it wasn't scary. Where's Daddy? Daddy's on duty. Sleep, dear. Good for you for not being afraid of dreams. Mary ruffled her son's hair, and he closed his eyes. He has a dog in every dream now. Well, we should get a dog, thought Mary, with a happy smile on her face.